George Miller sat at his cluttered desk in a dimly lit hotel room, the hum of the air conditioning mixing with the distant sounds of the bustling city outside. At 55, he was a seasoned salesman, a title he wore with a mix of pride and exhaustion. His life had been a whirlwind of deals, negotiations, and endless travel, a path that had led him far from the sleepy coastal town where he had grown up. Fluent in 5 languages, George had carved out a successful career as the head of sales at a prominent trading company, his skills opening doors in markets across Europe and Asia. However, this success came at a cost: time away from home and the family he loved. As he prepared for another long night of work, George couldn't shake the memories of his childhood. He recalled his parents' dreams of a better life, their sacrifices echoing in his mind. They had emigrated to the States in search of opportunity, instilling in him a relentless ambition to succeed. Yet, as he faced the growing distance in his marriage, he wondered if all his sacrifices had been worth it. Did the accolades and financial security mean anything if he was losing his family? Lucy Miller was once the vibrant heart of George's world. They had met during a university event, her laughter infectious, her spirit unyielding. After their marriage, Lucy had made the difficult decision to leave her promising career in marketing to become a stay-at-home mom. In those early years, she embraced her new role, finding joy in the little things: playdates, school projects, and family dinners. However, as the years passed, Lucy's demeanor began to change. The laughter that once filled their home faded into a distant memory, replaced by a cold resentment that George struggled to comprehend. Now, Lucy seemed like a shadow of her former self. The weight of unfulfilled dreams hung heavy on her shoulders, and her frustration morphed into bitterness. She often retreated into silence, her eyes glossing over as George spoke of his day or shared his excitement about new business ventures. He could sense her growing contempt, the love they once shared eroded by years of unspoken grievances and unmet expectations. Their daughter, Hazel, was navigating the tumultuous waters of adolescence. At 15, she was caught between childhood innocence and the complexities of young adulthood. Her relationship with both parents was strained. George sensed a shift away from him, a silent tug-of-war as Hazel leaned more towards her mother for support. The bond that George once felt with Hazel, built on bedtime stories and weekend adventures, seemed to fray with each passing day. He longed to connect with her, to understand her world, but it felt as if an invisible barrier had risen between them. The warmth that once enveloped their family had dissipated, leaving George feeling like an outsider in his own home. Hazel's laughter, once a joyful sound, now echoed with a hint of derision, as if she too had internalized her mother's disdain. It was during one of George's business trips, thousands of miles away from home, that everything began to unravel. He was seated in a high-rise office overlooking the sprawling cityscape when a call from Lucy pierced through his focus. Her voice, cold and detached, delivered the shocking news: divorce papers had been filed. The words echoed in his mind, but disbelief quickly morphed into a visceral shock. He could hardly comprehend the finality of it all, his heart racing as he tried to grasp the reality that his wife, the mother of his child, was ready to walk away. When the call ended, George felt a disorienting mix of betrayal and confusion. He had sacrificed so much for this family, believing in the power of their love, yet Lucy's cold demeanor suggested a long-buried resentment had finally surfaced. As he sat there, trying to process the fallout, the realization hit him: Hazel had chosen to support Lucy in this decision. The betrayal stung deeper than the divorce itself, twisting the knife of heartache into his gut. In that moment, George felt utterly alone, adrift in a world that once made sense. The foundation of his life had crumbled beneath him, leaving only the shards of his broken dreams and a growing determination to confront the storm that lay ahead. In the days that followed Lucy's call, George found himself in a state of emotional turmoil. The luxurious hotel suite, once a temporary refuge during business trips, now felt like a gilded cage. He stared out at the skyline, the vibrant city bustling below, but all he could see was the life he had built slowly unraveling. Memories of laughter-filled dinners and family vacations haunted him, overshadowed by the impending divorce that felt like a noose tightening around his throat. Each day became a battle against a growing sense of abandonment and confusion. He replayed moments in his mind, the last time he held Hazel's hand, the last family portrait taken, the last time Lucy had smiled genuinely. All of it felt distant, like watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. As he reflected on the sacrifices he had made for their family and career, a bitter taste filled his mouth. Had he truly been so blind to the discontent brewing beneath the surface? The nights grew longer, filled with shadows of doubt and despair. George felt a storm brewing within him, a deep-seated anger that threatened to surface. He questioned everything, his marriage, his role as a father, and the very fabric of his identity. He had poured himself into his work to provide for them, to build a life filled with comfort and opportunity. Yet, all it had led to was this, a wife who had become a stranger and a daughter who was slipping away. It was during a sleepless night that George received another call from Lucy, her voice dripping with a cold detachment that made his skin crawl. She laid out her demands with an unsettling clarity: substantial alimony, a share of their savings, and the family home. As she spoke, George felt the world around him dissolve into a haze of disbelief. The ulterior motives behind her demands became painfully clear. This was about more than just finances. It was an assertion of control, a final blow in a battle he hadn't even known was being fought. Lucy's contempt for him was palpable, her words laced with a venom that struck deeper than any physical blow. "You've always been more interested in your work than your family," she sneered. George's heart sank. Had he truly been so neglectful, or was this merely her weapon, twisted by years of pent-up resentment? The emotional weight of her demands bore down on him, and for the first time, he felt the sting of betrayal not just from his wife but also from the life he had so carefully crafted. As he hung up the phone, George felt a surge of determination rise within him. He had spent too long being a passive participant in his own life. If Lucy wanted to play a game, he would no longer be a pawn. He began to formulate a plan, one that would allow him to reclaim his narrative and seek justice for the emotional wounds inflicted by the woman he had once loved. In the weeks that followed the devastating revelations, George found himself trapped in a loop of reflection. Each evening, he would sit on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, replaying memories of their courtship and early marriage. It felt like a cruel joke. Those days had been filled with laughter, shared dreams, and a love that seemed unbreakable. They had been inseparable, passionate partners bound by ambition and affection. He recalled the spark in Lucy's eyes when they first met at a university event. They had danced until dawn, their laughter mingling with the music. It was during those carefree days that Lucy had shared her dreams of starting a marketing firm, her ambition shining brighter than the stars outside. George had supported her every step of the way, imagining a future where both of their dreams could coexist. But as the years passed, something changed. The woman who had once inspired him transformed into a resentful partner, her laughter replaced by sighs of disappointment. The transition from a career woman to a stay-at-home mom had drained Lucy of her vibrancy. Instead of flourishing in her new role, she became trapped, her ambitions stifled by the daily grind of motherhood. George began to see glimpses of her frustration, sharp words during arguments, the rolling of her eyes at his career successes, the growing resentment that crept into their conversations. As he reflected on these moments, George felt an overwhelming sense of loss. How had they drifted so far apart? It was as if they were two ships sailing in opposite directions, each anchored to their grievances, unable to find a way back to each other. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood Lucy's struggles. He had been so focused on his own career, on providing for their family, that he failed to notice the signs of her discontent. Meanwhile, Hazel was evolving into a young woman, her interests and friendships shifting rapidly as she approached her teenage years. Once a daddy's girl who sought George's attention, she now seemed to withdraw into her own world. Their once strong bond was fraying, and George could sense the tide turning. Hazel spent more time with her friends, and less at home, often choosing to confide in Lucy rather than him. George tried to reach out, attempting to engage her in conversations about school, friends, and her dreams, but he was met with a cool distance that left him aching. The shift in Hazel's allegiance felt like another betrayal, adding to the weight on his already burdened heart. Lucy, once a supportive partner, was now influencing their daughter in ways George couldn't comprehend. When George overheard Hazel laughing at a comment Lucy made about him, a deep pang of sorrow settled in his chest. The camaraderie they once shared was slipping away, and he felt powerless to stop it. Each failed attempt to connect with Hazel deepened his sense of isolation. He questioned whether he had ever truly known his daughter, and the thought gnawed at him. Was this the consequence of his long hours and frequent absences? Had he pushed her into her mother's arms, making it impossible for Hazel to see him as anything other than a distant, preoccupied figure? Amidst the emotional chaos, George began to plot his next steps. The divorce proceedings had turned his life upside down, but he refused to let Lucy dictate the terms of his future. He contemplated moving abroad, where he could escape the painful reminders of his current life. As he lay awake at night, he imagined a new beginning, a fresh start in a place where his past wouldn't haunt him. The thought of transferring everything into Lucy's name nagged at him. It felt like a risk, but it was a move he believed would give him the freedom to take control of his life post-divorce. He envisioned a world where he could focus on rebuilding himself, free from Lucy's manipulation and the emotional turmoil that had become his daily existence. With renewed determination, George started to strategize. He spent hours researching his legal options, poring over documents and seeking advice from lawyers. He began collecting evidence, emails, texts, and any communications that could serve as proof of Lucy's infidelity and the emotional abuse he felt he had suffered. As he delved deeper into this task, a fire ignited within him, fueling a desire to take charge of his narrative. George was determined not to be a victim in this story. He would fight back against the betrayal he had endured, reclaiming his life and redefining his future. The road ahead would be challenging, but with each step, he felt a sense of empowerment growing within him. No longer would he allow himself to be passive. He would emerge from this ordeal stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. The day George had been both dreading and anticipating arrived with the sharpness of an icy blade. He sat in a sterile conference room, his heart pounding as he awaited the results of a DNA test he had ordered in secret. The room, filled with the lingering scent of antiseptic and anxiety, seemed to close in around him. He had convinced himself that the truth would either be a relief or a curse. Either way, he needed to know. As the technician entered, the weight of the moment hung thick in the air. "Mr. Miller, the results are in," the technician said, her voice devoid of emotion. George's breath hitched as she handed him the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. As he tore it open and scanned the results, the room spun. The words danced before his eyes: "Hazel is not your biological daughter." Shock and disbelief washed over him like a tsunami, engulfing him in a wave of betrayal and heartbreak. All the love, care, and sacrifices he had poured into raising her felt like a cruel joke. In an instant, the facade of their family crumbled, leaving behind only a chilling void. How could Lucy have done this? The anger bubbled within him, simmering just below the surface, as he clenched his fists to steady himself. Fueled by rage and a desperate need for answers, George stormed out of the conference room and drove straight to Lucy's house. The confrontation that awaited him would be cathartic, but he was also terrified of what he might discover about the woman he once loved. When he arrived, Lucy was seated on the couch, flipping through a magazine, the epitome of calm as if nothing had changed. The sight of her infuriated him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low growl that resonated with pain. "What is it, George?" she replied, feigning nonchalance as she glanced up. "Hazel is not my daughter," he spat, the words punctuating the air like a gunshot. Lucy's expression flickered, revealing a fleeting glimpse of fear before she masked it with annoyance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, but George could see the cracks forming in her facade. "I had a DNA test done, and I know the truth." "Who is the real father?" George pressed, desperation lacing his words as he demanded the answers he needed. The atmosphere grew tense as Lucy's calm demeanor began to unravel. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. "What does it matter?" she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You never cared about her anyway. Don't you dare turn this around on me." George exploded, the years of hurt and betrayal flooding to the surface. You lied to me, Lucy. You let me raise her, to love her, and now I find out she's not even mine. Her composure finally shattered, revealing the anger that had simmered beneath her surface. You think you're such a saint, don't you? You were never there. Always working, always chasing money. I was alone, and I needed someone, George. Brown was there for me when you weren't. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Brown? My former boss, he echoed, the realization settling in like a stone in his stomach. You had an affair with him? Stop acting so surprised, Lucy snapped. You know I was unhappy. You pushed me to it. George felt a surge of betrayal unlike anything he had ever known. The pieces fell into place, the years of Lucy's coldness now making sense. Every moment of indifference, every glance of resentment was a testament to her duplicity. I can't believe you would betray me like this, not just me, but our daughter. As George stood there, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him, something inside him shifted. The pain of betrayal ignited a fierce resolve. He was no longer the passive husband accepting his fate, he was a man on a mission. He would not let Lucy dictate the narrative of his life any longer. I will expose you, he declared, his voice steady with newfound strength. I'll gather every piece of evidence I can find to prove your deceit. You won't get away with this. With that, George turned on his heel, leaving Lucy in a storm of confusion and anger. The time for tears was over, it was time for action. As he walked away, he felt an unfamiliar weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was taking control of his life, armed with the truth and a desire for justice. He would uncover the layers of lies, not just for himself but for Hazel as well. He would no longer be a victim of Lucy's treachery, he would fight back with every ounce of strength he possessed. As he made his way home, George's heart raced with determination. The storm was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. In the days that followed his explosive confrontation with Lucy, George immersed himself in his plan for revenge. Fueled by anger and betrayal, he began collecting evidence of Lucy's infidelity, meticulously piecing together the truth that had shattered his world. He combed through old emails, messages, and any records that could expose her deceit. Each discovery felt like a victory, a step closer to reclaiming his narrative. With every document he gathered, George felt his power grow. He reached out to a private investigator, enlisting their help to dig deeper into Lucy's life. He needed to know everything, details about her affair with Brown, any financial discrepancies, and any other skeletons hidden in their closet. He wanted to expose them both, to show the world the woman who had betrayed him and the man who had taken advantage of their marriage. The private investigator proved to be a valuable ally, unearthing information that confirmed George's worst suspicions. Photos, text messages, and witness accounts painted a damning picture of Lucy's betrayal. Each piece of evidence strengthened George's resolve. He began to envision how he would confront them again, this time with the truth firmly in his grasp. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, George felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. He had always been a man of integrity, a man who avoided conflict when possible. But now, he was determined to reclaim his dignity and expose the truth. The thought of seeing the shock on Lucy's face when she realized he knew everything filled him with a grim satisfaction. The day of the confrontation arrived, a crisp autumn afternoon that felt charged with electricity. George invited Lucy and Brown to a meeting at his office, the tension palpable as they entered. Lucy's expression shifted from casual indifference to surprise as George gestured for them to sit. Brown, ever the confident businessman, smirked, unaware of the storm brewing beneath George's composed exterior. "Thanks for coming," George said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I wanted to discuss a few matters regarding our divorce and some revelations I've come to understand." He watched as their expressions shifted from casual curiosity to confusion, then finally to apprehension. With each word, George laid out the evidence he had gathered, photos of Lucy and Brown together, text messages that confirmed their affair, and financial records that hinted at Lucy's attempts to manipulate their assets during the divorce. The air grew thick with tension as realization dawned on both of them. Lucy's face paled, her bravado slipping away as George presented the proof. "You thought you could get away with this, didn't you?" he said, his voice rising slightly, fueled by a mix of anger and relief. "You lied to me, and you lied to our daughter." Brown's confidence evaporated, replaced by a mix of anger and fear. "This is none of your business, George," he retorted, but George could see the cracks forming in his facade. "It is my business, especially when it concerns my family," George countered, his resolve hardening. "I won't let you manipulate this situation any longer. You'll pay for what you've done." As Lucy and Brown scrambled to defend themselves, George felt a sense of catharsis wash over him. The years of silence and suffering were finally breaking free, replaced by a newfound strength. He had taken control of his life, and nothing could stop him now. In the days that followed the confrontation, George noticed a change within himself. The emotional weight that had burdened him for so long began to lift. With every passing moment, he felt his self-worth returning. He started making plans for his future, focusing on personal growth and healing. The divorce process continued, but now he faced it with determination and clarity. He reached out to Hazel, seeking to reconnect and mend the frayed bond between them. It wasn't easy, their relationship had been strained by the turmoil of the past months, but George was committed to being present for her. He learned to listen, to understand her struggles, and to support her as she navigated her own feelings about the family's upheaval. In moments of quiet reflection, George began to grasp the lessons learned from betrayal and trust. The pain he had experienced was profound, but it also illuminated the path to personal growth. He recognized that he deserved happiness, that he could carve out a life on his own terms, independent of Lucy's influence. As he took these steps toward healing, George felt a sense of hope blossom within him. He was no longer defined by Lucy's betrayal or Hazel's distance. He was forging his own identity, reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from him. As the dust settled from the tumultuous confrontation, George found himself standing at the threshold of a new life. The divorce was finalized, but the emotional upheaval had left him transformed. No longer the passive husband, he had emerged from the wreckage with a newfound sense of empowerment. He spent countless hours reflecting on the lessons learned from betrayal and trust, using these insights to shape his future. George took time to invest in himself. He enrolled in a leadership course that focused on personal development, eager to rediscover his passions and strengths. The journey of self-exploration was both liberating and challenging. He learned to embrace vulnerability, understanding that it was okay to feel hurt, but it was crucial to move forward. The weeks turned into months, and each passing day brought a little more clarity. He also took steps to build a healthier relationship with Hazel. After a heart-to-heart conversation, they agreed to meet regularly for lunch, a simple but meaningful gesture that allowed them to reconnect. George encouraged Hazel to share her thoughts and feelings, and slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crumble. They talked about everything, the pain of the divorce, her struggles at school, and her hopes for the future. Through these conversations, George realized how much he had missed during the years he had devoted to his career. Closure with Lucy and Hazel. Meanwhile, Lucy faced the aftermath of her choices. The financial security she had sought through the divorce dwindled as her relationship with Brown soured under the weight of public scrutiny. Word of their affair and the circumstances surrounding their breakup became the talk of the town, and Lucy found herself isolated and struggling. George couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. They had once shared dreams and laughter, but that connection had disintegrated. One afternoon, George received a text from Lucy, asking to meet. He hesitated but ultimately agreed, recognizing that closure was necessary. When they sat down in a quiet cafe, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Lucy looked weary, her confidence diminished, the sparkle in her eyes replaced by a dullness that spoke volumes. "I've made mistakes, George," she said, her voice trembling. "I see that now. I thought I could find happiness by trying to control everything, but I was wrong." George listened, surprised by her candidness. You destroyed our family, Lucy. I hope you understand the impact of your choices on Hazel, he replied, his voice steady but laced with pain. I do, she admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. I didn't realize how far I'd fallen until it was too late. I wish I could take it all back. For the first time in years, George felt a glimmer of empathy for Lucy. The betrayal still stung, but he recognized that they were both human, flawed in their own ways. I hope you find a way to heal, he said finally, choosing to focus on his own journey rather than dwelling on the past. As their conversation ended, George felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had gained closure, not just for himself, but for Hazel as well. He understood that healing would take time, but he was ready to embrace whatever came next. With a sense of peace settling within him, George turned his attention to the future. He focused on rebuilding his life, establishing a new routine that prioritized his well-being and that of his daughter. He began volunteering at a local community center, engaging with others and discovering joy in giving back. Each interaction reinforced his belief that connection and support were essential in overcoming life's challenges. In time, George found a new job, one that aligned more with his values and allowed him to be home more often. It was a step toward reclaiming not just his career, but also his role as a father. As he poured himself into his work, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, as if he were finally stepping into the person he was meant to be. As George continued on his path of self-discovery and growth, he remained vigilant about the lessons learned from his past. The betrayal had shaped him, but it would not define him. He recognized that family, in all its forms, was about love, understanding, and acceptance, values he was committed to upholding moving forward. The story of George and Lucy encapsulates the complex nature of betrayal and trust within relationships. Lucy's infidelity and her calculated attempts to manipulate George's life illustrate how deeply personal and painful betrayal can be. Their marriage, once filled with love and mutual support, became a battleground of deceit and emotional warfare, highlighting the fragility of trust. George's journey through heartbreak serves as a poignant reminder of how betrayal can shatter familial bonds, leading to profound consequences not just for the individuals involved, but also for their loved ones. As George navigated the aftermath of his wife's actions, he grappled with feelings of abandonment and confusion. The betrayal forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities and ultimately spurred him toward growth. This theme emphasizes that trust, once broken, requires considerable effort to rebuild, often leading to a reevaluation of personal values and relationships. Through the turmoil, George's character evolves from a passive participant in his own life to an empowered individual. The adversity he faced, his wife's betrayal and the ensuing emotional chaos, propels him on a journey of self-discovery. As he collects evidence of Lucy's deceit and confronts her, George gains clarity about his own worth and desires. The process of reclaiming his life allows George to reflect on his priorities and values. He learns to embrace vulnerability, understanding that it's a necessary part of personal growth. The leadership course he undertakes becomes a catalyst for his transformation, providing him with the tools to navigate not only his professional life but also his emotional landscape. This theme emphasizes that personal growth often stems from facing adversity and finding the strength to move forward. The narrative delves into the intricate dynamics of family relationships, particularly between parents and children. George's bond with Hazel reflects the complexities of navigating adolescence while dealing with parental conflict. As Hazel aligns herself with Lucy, George feels the sting of rejection, forcing him to confront the reality of their shifting relationship. Through his efforts to reconnect with Hazel, George learns the importance of communication and understanding in rebuilding trust. Their evolving relationship showcases the challenges parents face in maintaining connections with their children, especially during times of turmoil. The story underscores the notion that family dynamics are rarely straightforward and that the impacts of betrayal can resonate across generations. The journey of both George and Hazel serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of familial love, the potential for healing, and the necessity of open dialogue in fostering understanding. As they work through their shared pain, they begin to establish a foundation for a healthier relationship, illustrating that, despite betrayal, healing and reconnection are possible.